All right, good morning, everyone, and Chodesh Tov. Today's Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, so it's a great day to restart and resume our study of Navi. It's been a number of weeks since we last met, just with all the holidays and all of the breakups. So we left off at chapter 16, Perek Tet Zayin of the book of Yehoshua. And today's goal is to try to cover Perek Tet Zayin and Perek Yud Zayin, chapters 16 and 17, as we take an in-depth look at the breakdown of land for the tribe of Yossef. It's important to remember that the tribe of Yossef is actually two tribes, because we know Yossef had two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, and Yaakov Avinu, before he passed away, adopted those two children like his actual children. So Yosef is actually two tribes that get two different portions in the land of Israel, one for Menashe and one for Ephraim. The tribe of Levi doesn't receive portion, and so that's how we still end up with the breakdown of 12 tribes, because Yosef counts as two and he replaces the tribe of Levi. We also will note that the tribe of Shimon does not receive their own part of land in Eretz Israel. They live in the midst of Yehuda, who we discussed in the previous chapter. So to pick up where we left off, the first half of the book of Yehoshua spoke all about conquering the land and driving out the Canaanite nations. Now we're in the second half of the book, which discusses divvying up and settling the land of Eretz Israel. And in some ways, the settling of the land of Eretz Israel is more challenging than the actual conquest. The conquest was divine. Hashem helped us out. Some battles, yes, some battles, no. We did a lot on our own. Now we get to the divvying up, the settlement of the land of Eretz Israel, and we'll see that time and again we'll have some struggles and we'll have some challenges. Last class, I should say, we did the breakdown of the tribe of Yehuda. It starts with Yehuda, and we noted that the Navi starts with Yehuda because Yehuda are the kings. They're a clearly significant tribe. They're one of the more numerous tribes amongst the Jewish people, and they play a very important role in the unification of Am Yisrael. Not to mention, today we call ourselves what? Yehudim, because we all believe that we descend from that kingdom of Yehuda and all those tribes of Yehuda as well. Obviously, we have Kohanim and Levim, but we all belong to Malchut Yehuda. So it makes sense, looking into the future, that the text of the Navi would outline the tribe of Yehuda first. After the tribe of Yehuda, we move to the tribes of Yosef. And already, without reading any Pisukim, just the fact that the Navi mentions Yosef right after Yehuda is already an important fact in and of itself. Before I mention that, and I'll come back to that in a minute, I think it's important also to note that typically people skip a lot of these chapters. They don't read these Pisukim. They find them to be very bland and very dry because, after all, the majority of it is just outlining cities and boundaries, and you could very easily skip over it or just see a map and, you're good to go. And that's true. I mean, I can't deny, I hate to say that anything in Torah or in Tanakh is bland or dry, but as far as the exciting, miraculous stories that we saw in the beginning versus, boundaries of the land of Eretz Israel, doesn't really do it for many people, and I hear that and I understand it. But it's worth noting that the fact that the Navi spends so much time actually outlining and detailing for us, painstaking detail, the land of Eretz Israel and who got what and what city and what this and what that, shows us a number of things, not the least of which is the importance of the land of Eretz Israel and the importance that the Jewish people felt towards the land of Eretz Israel. It was important that every detail meticulously get accepted and get laid out to show how everybody wanted their portion in the land of Eretz Israel, and they didn't want to be gypped. They wanted to make sure that they got every square foot of land in Eretz Israel that they so rightfully deserved. Everybody wanted that portion in the land of Eretz Israel, and I think the incredible detail that the Navi gives to us about the boundaries of Eretz Israel seek to illustrate to us how beautiful it was in the eyes of the Jewish people and how everybody there wanted what they deserved and wanted a part of Eretz Israel. And for us living outside of Eretz Israel, I think that's very meaningful for us to understand what it means to own a home in Eretz Israel, to own a portion of the land, to be able to settle there, I think is very important. I think it's very significant. You see how important it was to those tribes, and it should still be important to us today. So that's something to just keep in mind as a general lesson for us, the importance and love that we have for the land of Israel. Going back to the point that I started with, the juxtaposition of the tribe of Yehuda and the tribes of Yosef. Why do you think the Navi mentions these two back to back? What's the connection between the tribe of Yehuda and the tribes of Yosef? I'll open up the floor to anybody who has a connection.
The Beit HaMikdash was built in both of their portions.
Excellent. I will amend that slightly. The Beit HaMikdash was not in the portion of Yehuda. It was in the portion of Binyamin and Yosef, but Binyamin and Yehuda did share a kingdom together. They were very close together, so much so that parts of the Temple Mount actually crossed between Yehuda and Binyamin. So it is true that the Beit HaMikdash stood somewhere in connection with Binyamin and Yehuda, right? And Binyamin is one of the children of Rachel, also the brother of Yosef. So that has a nice connection. I think what we would add is that the Mishkan was in the portion of Yosef, because the Mishkan stood for 400 years in the city of Shiloh. And as we will see on the map, Shiloh is part of the boundary of Yosef. So clearly, when you put Yosef, Binyamin, and Yehuda, and by the way, Binyamin is the next tribe that we're going to read about after the tribes of Yosef. When you put Binyamin, Yosef, and Yehuda together, they lead the way, because those are our Beit HaMikdash and our Mishkan. The epicenters of Jewish religious life were found in those tribes. So it definitely makes sense that they should lead the way and be mentioned one next to the other. An excellent thought and an excellent point. Anybody else? Any other reasons why Yehuda and Yosef might be next to each other? Thinking maybe in terms of Bereshit. How about? Yeah. I'll say whatever you're going to say. It's fine.
I don't know. I'm not sure about what I was going to say, if it's correct or not.
I'll determine if it's correct or not, so you can go.
When Yosef was thrown into the pit, did Yehuda come to he had something to do?
Well, whose idea was it to? No, excellent. No, you're right. You're right on the. That's where I wanted to go. Where I wanted to go with this is, remember that these tribes represent their ancestors, right? So we call them Yehuda and Yosef. They're the children of Yaakov Avinu, right? So a lot of what happens to the tribes themselves later on has already been foreshadowed and quote unquote predestined from where they come from, right? So we're seeing the manifestations of the strife between Yosef and Yehuda that existed when they were the children of Yaakov Avinu. Whose idea is it to sell Yosef into slavery? It's Yehuda's opinion, right? You're thinking about when the brothers want to kill Yosef, so they say, let's kill him. Reuven comes to his defense initially, says, don't kill him, let's throw him in the pit. Eventually, if Yosef had stayed in the pit, and the Torah tells us that Reuven had a plan to try and come later on and pull him out and save him, but had Yosef stayed in the pit, he would have died. Yehuda comes along and says, let's not have blood on our hands. Let's sell him down. And so Yehuda is the seller, is the idea who originates the idea to sell Yosef into slavery. And at this point, Yehuda and Yosef become the leading figures in the saga of the children of Yaakov. They take the clear leadership roles amongst the family. Yehuda takes the leadership role to sell Yosef, as a result, spiraling the family into depression, into a lot of problems, but he redeems himself later on in the story, because who takes charge of Binyamin to bring him down? It's Yehuda who takes charge of Binyamin, brings the family down. When things look like they're spiraling out of control for Binyamin, who steps up to the plate? Yehuda goes up to what he thinks is the viceroy of Egypt. It turns out to be Yosef in disguise, and Yehuda tells the viceroy, take me instead. And so Yehuda clearly is one of the stronger personalities in the story of Yosef and his brothers. He assumes a leadership role early on. He makes a mistake. He redeems himself later on. And Yehuda earns his stripes. And at Yaakov Avinu's death, he tells Yehuda, ata yoducha ahecha. You're going to be the leader of your brothers. Lo yasur shevet mi Yehuda. The staff of kingship will not leave Yehuda. Yehuda has earned the right to be the tribe from which kings will descend. He's earned that leadership role. Yosef, too, is clearly a very important figure in that whole situation as well. Yosef, in fact, becomes the leader of Egypt and saves the entire family. And so we have the two major personalities of the family of Yaakov are none other than Yehuda and Yosef. And so it's not a coincidence that here, Yehuda and Yosef should be the leaders in which the text records their portion of the land of Eretz Yisrael. Now, the relationship between Yehuda and Yosef is an up and down one. At times, it's very, very amicable. At times, it's very powerful. And of course, at times we see that it's very rocky, such as in the sale of Yosef. Not unlike, by the way, the relationship of Yehuda and Yosef's mothers, which is really where this all comes from. Rachel and Leah. The family of Leah versus the family of Rachel is a tense situation. We read the story, which we'll read in several weeks from now, this tension that exists between Leah and Rachel themselves, and then trickles down to their family members between the children of Leah and the children of Rachel, is clearly a thread that weaves its way all throughout that story itself, but continues far into the future when they've become tribes, when we're later on, the leadership of Am Yisrael. There's a lot of strife between them. By the way, speaking of leadership, what tribe is Yehoshua from? Do we know?
Ephraim.
Excellent, very good. He's from the tribe of Ephraim, a descendant of Yosef. We know this from the Torah because he was one of the 12 spies. The Torah says the Mate Ephraim, Hoshea bin Nun. So the first leader after Moshe is from the family of Yosef. Our first king of Israel. Who's our first king? We're going to meet him in Sefer Melachim. It's Shaul HaMelech. What tribe does Shaul descend from? He descends from Binyamin, another one of the children of Rachel. So at the outset, our leadership positions are being filled by people from the family of Rachel, from Yosef, Ephraim, and Binyamin. But they falter. Shaul makes mistakes. And who takes over? David HaMelech. What tribe is David from? He's from Yehuda. And then he assumes the mantle of leadership. So when one falters, the other is there to pick up the pieces, so to speak. So there is this relationship, sometimes good, sometimes bad, between Yosef and Yehuda, Rachel and Leah. I'll close with 2 points before we read the Pisukim, but all of this is there and is hinted to in this juxtaposition that we see in Sefer Yehoshua. I'll close with 2 points. The first of which I just lost. The first of which actually connects to Pisukim in Yehezkel, which I wanted to show, is the idea that our rabbis saw this for the future as well. They say that there's going to be 2 Mashiachs. Mashiach, our salvation, happens in stages. And there's going to be a first Mashiach and then a second Mashiach. The first Mashiach will be Mashiach ben Yosef, the first anointed one, son of Yosef, who will come and bring a certain level of redemption to the Jewish people, but will die and will leave the pieces of the puzzle not fully complete until who comes along afterwards? Mashiach ben David, the anointed one from David, from the tribe of Yehuda, who will put the pieces all completely together to bring us our ultimate salvation. It's these Pisukim that are brought in Yehezkel, I believe. I want to just pull it up here for a minute because I want to read you the Pisukim, but I forget which chapter it is. I want to say it's chapter 34, but I forget off the top of my head. If I can pull it up, let's see if I get it. Chapter 34, is it? Might not be. Nope, I forgot it. I don't think so. there is a vision for Yehezkel. It's not in 34. I apologize. There's a vision that Yehezkel gets that Hashem tells him to take two sticks. On one of them, he should write Yosef on it. On the other one, he should write Yehuda, and he has to merge the sticks together, which is a premonition for the fact that Yosef and Yehuda will eventually be met together. When the kingdom splits, right now we're one kingdom, but eventually the kingdom will split after David's son Shlomo. It'll split into Yehuda, and it'll split into Ephraim, who will take the other 10 tribes and lead. And so there's a tension, tug of war between Yehuda and Yosef, the children of Leah and the children of Rachel. When they're united and together, we're as strong as anything. When we're separated and divided from each other, there's strife and tension, anxiety and frustration. And hopefully the Mashiach in the future is there to repair that. And it comes in stages aided by both of these significant tribes together. So I know that's reading a lot into what we're talking about over here, but I think all of that is already hinted to in the fact that when it first breaks down the land of Israel, it gives us Yehuda, and then it gives us Yosef. And those two are going to lead the way into eventually bringing all of Am Yisrael together. And I think that that's very important. We will see as we go through the Psukim now, how beloved the land of Israel was to the tribe of Yosef, and in particular to his son Menashe. So the first of the two chapters talks about the tribe of Ephraim. So what I'd like to do for a minute here is I'm going to actually pull up for us on the Zoom, and I apologize for those who are live. In a minute, I will take my computer and I will show it around to you. You could see over here, if anybody wants to come around, you could see over here, and you could see it on the Zoom, the breakdown of the land of Eretz Yisrael. So I'm sorry, I'm making everybody come up, right? So if you take a look, you could see where the tribe of Menashe and Ephraim are. They're right in the heartland of Eretz Yisrael. This is the other side of the Jordan. Here you have Ephraim and Menashe, and they're very much next to Yehuda, with just Binyamin and Dan kind of crossing in between them. But they have a massive portion in the land of Eretz Yisrael. You'll see the two of them together. You could see Shiloh, that's a significant city. The city of Shiloh is where the Mishkan is in the tribe of Ephraim, which belongs to Yosef as well. Okay? You could see this map is a very nice depiction. Go through, you could see all of these cities that are mentioned along the border. They're all going to get mentioned in the text itself as well. Okay. So let us begin by taking a look here at the Psukim. My apologies, 1 second. Take a look at the Psukim here. Where am I? Okay. ויצא הגורל לבני יוסף מירדן יריחו למי יריחו מזרחה המדבר עולה מיריחו בהר בית אל. Originally, the text phrases it as the goral, the portion that fell to Yosef. Now, Yosef incorporates two tribes. So you might be tempted to think here that one lottery was done for both tribes and then they split it. Say the commentaries that's not true. Radak and others say, although they're being lumped together, a special lottery was cast for Menashe and one for Ephraim, which means they didn't just get one portion and split it. The Torah, the lottery cast for each of them individually to get their own portions of land, even though they're being lumped here together. That's just because they both belong to the tribe of Yosef, and the Navi here wants to emphasize Yosef's role. It doesn't want Yosef to sort of get pushed to the wayside over here. I'll skip down to Pasuk Daled. The Pasuk says, Vayinhalu b'nei Yosef Menashe ve'Ephraim. The children of Yosef, Menashe and Ephraim, inherit their portion of land. The Navi first starts with the border of Ephraim, which is not surprising because, as we noted, Yehoshua himself is from the tribe of Ephraim. And although Ephraim is the younger of the siblings, Ephraim is the more prominent one, and hence his border is laid out prior to the border of his brother Menashe. In verses 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the Navi tells us the cities that run along the border of the tribe of Ephraim, right? So it tells us that there are cities like Atrot Adar and Bet Horon Shiloh gets mentioned. V'nasav hagil mizraha ta'anat Shiloh, right? And so we see a lot of these important cities get mentioned over here, and they're the ones that constitute the border of Ephraim. I'll just pull up the map for us just for one more moment, and I will zoom in on Ephraim, and you could see those cities. Whoops. You could see those cities that are mentioned here in the text. Some of the key ones, we know about Ai was the one that they battled and they lost originally because of Achan, and then they conquered it again with Bet El right next to it. Ai and Bet El, those were two cities that Yehoshua conquered miraculously together. You have Bet Horon is mentioned there, Gezer is mentioned there, and you have Shiloh, obviously, which is there as well. So these are the cities that run along the southern border of Ephraim, and we can see that Ephraim gets a decent portion right in the heart of Eretz Yisrael. Let's go back now to the final pasuk of chapter 16, which is a significant one, a pasuk that we've seen a few times, and we will see it again. The pasuk says, "Velo horishu et haKenaani hayoshev begazer." The tribe of Ephraim did not conquer and inherit all of the Canaanites that were in the city of Gezer. Vayeshev haKenaani bekerev Ephraim. For this reason, the Canaanites continued to dwell in the midst of the tribe of Ephraim ad hayom hazeh, until this day. Vayhi lemas oved. When we say to this day, we don't mean this day. We mean the day that this book was being written, which was by Yehoshua at the end of his life. After they had already conquered and settled the land, Yehoshua is lamenting the fact that his own tribe, Ephraim, was unable to completely rid the Canaanite presence from within their tribe. Vayhi lemas oved, although they were able to subjugate them to forced labor. So they were able to sort of squash them as far as their rights and their autonomy within the society, but their presence was still very much there and very much felt. And like we've said time and again, the fact that these little remnants of Canaanite nations continue to dwell amidst the Jewish people is going to be a thorn in their side as we conclude the book of Yehoshua and transition into the book of Shoftim. Because once we get into the book of Judges, where there is not a unified leader like Yehoshua, and we struggle to bring the Jewish people together, and time goes on and we become accustomed to these Canaanite nations practicing their culture in our midst, it leads to avodah zarah, it leads to fighting and warfare, it leads to a lot of troubles because we do not have complete control over everything that we're doing. So every time the text of the Navi mentions to us a nation, a tribe, I should say, that got their portion, it will relate to us what the relationship between that tribe was to the Canaanite peoples that were still in their midst. Many of them, it will note, were unable to completely purge themselves of the Canaanite presence. And that will come back later to haunt us. Any questions on chapter 16 or thoughts or comments to add over here? Yes, go ahead, Esther.
So it was made such an issue that they should really rid the people of Canaanim. So how is it that, blaming Hashem, like, why didn't he give them a little more to figure out, or did they fail at their own attempts?
It seems as though they failed, and we'll see this even more. Yeah, we'll see this even more clearly in the next chapter when we talk about Menashe. It seems that they failed. Remember, we talked about how God, throughout the process of conquering the land, continued to pull himself back from the miraculous intervention, and eventually left the Jewish people to fight their battles, quote unquote, on their own. And when we say on their own, we mean obviously with divine assistance, but in the natural way of things. And they needed to have that fortitude. And at a certain point, we see that the Jewish people ran out of steam, they ran out of gas, they ran out of strength, they just couldn't push themselves beyond their capabilities. And as a result, they left these little remnants of Canaanite tribes around, which are going to cause them problems in the future.
But why wasn't there anybody to say, come on, guys?
We will see Yehoshua will try to do that. But at a certain point, after settling the land and breaking everybody down, we lose the centrality of the Jewish people. Remember, until this point, we've been doing everything together. We haven't been so tribal, right? We've been doing everything as a unified body. Now we're starting to settle the land and giving out portions to different tribes. And what happens when you start separating people by tribes? You lose that unity of a nation. And so now the tribe of Ephraim, for example, has some Canaanite people left in them. Well, guess what? The other tribes say, you got to deal with that on your own. Those are your problems, not my problems.
So really their strength is in their unity.
100%, right? But it's also natural to do that. In other words, there's no other better system. We are consistently tribal, and the goal is to be tribal while still being unified. But it's very hard because once you break things down by tribes and everybody gets their portion, it's only natural that you sort of separate from each other and say, I got to worry about my territory, not to worry about my situation. I can't get involved in what other people are doing. And we'll see this time and again in the book of Judges that stories and wars will be fought by individual tribes. They won't be fought by all of the Jewish people. They won't call on their brothers and sisters to help them in the battle, or their brothers and sisters will be reluctant to help them in a battle that they're fighting within their own tribe because they have to worry about their own things. So part of the negative here is that as we break down the land by tribe, which is the only fair and logical way to break it down, a negative consequence happens of that, which is that we become more tribal and we become more distinct and separated from each other, and that causes us problems as well. Yeah, this will come even more to light in the next chapter. Let's begin chapter 17. Chapter 17 goes to the second of the two brothers, the tribe of Menashe. It opens, Vahi hagora lemate Menashe, the lot that was cast for the tribe of Menashe, Kihu bechor Yisrael, for he is the firstborn of Yosef, Kihu bechor Yosef. He's the firstborn of Yosef. What that means is that ki over here doesn't mean because, it means despite. In other words, despite the fact that Menashe was the firstborn and theoretically should have gotten his portion prior to Ephraim, because of Ephraim's prominence and the fact that Yehoshua comes from them, they got their tribe, they got their portion before the tribe of Menashe and had a distinct spot. Now, one thing we have to keep in mind about the tribe of Menashe is that the tribe of Menashe occupies land on both sides of the Jordan River, right? Let's not forget that the tribe of Menashe split in half. Half of them went to live on the eastern side of the Jordan River with the tribes of Reuven and Gad. The other half enter the land of Eretz Yisrael and get their own portion. Now, if you recall from the map, the land of Menashe is massive when you look at both of these things put together. I brought it up here for you. You could see all of this yellow. This is all on the side of you can see over here, all of this yellow over here. This is all Menashe on the side of the eastern side of the Jordan, out of Eretz Yisrael. And this is the other half of Menashe in the land of Eretz Yisrael. You could see when you combine those two pieces together, it's a massive portion of land. Even if you just looked at the portion of land in the land of Eretz Yisrael, it's larger than Ephraim, the whole tribe of Ephraim put together, maybe even with some other tribes added there. So the tribe of Menashe, as we'll soon see, was a very numerous tribe. They had a lot of people, and they receive a very large portion of the land of Eretz Yisrael, not to mention the other portion they get on the other side of the land of Eretz Yisrael, on the eastern side of the Jordan. Now, that land on the eastern side of the Jordan, they did a lot on their own to inhabit that. They conquered those lands. That's what it opens with in Pasuk Aleph. Lemachir bechor Menashe, to Machir, the eldest of Menashe, Avi ha-Gilad, the father of the Gilad, Kihu haya ish milchama. He was a man of warfare. He was a strong guy. Vahilo ha-Gilad v'ha-Bashan. He took over the land right on the eastern side of the Jordan that belonged to Og melech ha-Bashan. That land right on the Jordan River is coveted land. You could imagine for many different reasons. You had to be very, very strong to be able to not only conquer that land, but also hold on to it, right? It's like that portion of land in the Risk board. I don't know how many people play Risk, right? But if you play Risk, the game, there's like that one portion of land that gets conquered from 6 different ways. To hold on to Asia, right, in the Risk game, to hold on to Asia, which has like 9 different ways of getting in, is a very hard continent to hold on to it. That's why you get 7 pieces when you hold it for one turn, right? Okay, so for those who get the reference, you got it. But if not, the idea being that if you're going to hold on to that piece of land, which is highly coveted and is constantly being, has people have their eyes on it, you have to be a strong guy. And the text of our Navi tells us that This Machir ben Menashe, the eldest of the tribe of Menashe, was an Ish Milchama. He conquered the land from Og Melech Bashan. He went and conquered cities. He expanded the border, and he was so strong to also hold on to that portion of land from neighbors who were trying to conquer it from him. To everybody else in Pasuk Bet, in verse 2, it says, Vahi livnei Menashe hanotarim. To all of the leftover families of Menashe, Livnei Aviezer, Helek, Asriel, Shechem, Hefer, Shemidah, all of these other families, they all got portions in the land of Eretz Yisrael itself. Now, why is the tribe of Menashe significant? Here we have another reminder of a story that happened in the Torah itself. One of the children of Menashe is Hefer. Hefer gave birth to a man named Tzelofchad. And Tzelofchad had 5 daughters. He had no sons. And the Torah recounts several times how the daughters of Tzelofchad, who come from the tribe of Menashe, approached Moshe Rabbeinu and asked him for a portion of land. Moshe asked God. God said, indeed, they do deserve a portion of land. And God reevaluated and regave all of the laws of inheritance based on males and females to the Jewish people. So here, as we've seen time and again, the book of Yehoshua is a sort of epilogue to the Torah itself. Several issues that are brought up in the Torah get their resolution in the book of Yehoshua, not the least of which is this one, the daughters of Tzelofchad. So here we are, several years later, over a decade later, after conquering the land of Eretz Yisrael, we're now settling it, and they come to settle the land of Menashe. And who should approach Yehoshua to ask for their land? The daughters of Tzelofchad, who are still around. Pasuk 3, verse Gima. Tzlofchad ben Hefer, to Tzelofchad, the son of Hefer, ben Gilad ben Machir ben Menashe, who belonged to this very strong family of Menashe. Lo hayu lo banim ki im banot. He did not have any sons, but only daughters. Ve'ele shemot benotav. The following are the names of their daughters: Machla ve'noah, Chogla, Milka, ve'Tirza. Every time the daughters of Tzelofchad are mentioned, the Navi or the Torah mentions all 5 of them by name. It never just calls them Benot Tzelofchad. It always mentions each of them by name, perhaps to give them each credit for the fact that they came together in fortitude to ask Moshe and now Yehoshua for their rightful portion of land. It was not easy back then, and it wouldn't even be easy now for a group of women to approach the leading male of the Jewish people, the prophet, and say, remember us, we need our portion in the land of Israel. Where's our portion in the land of Israel? But because of their love for Eretz Yisrael, they have no reservations, and each one of them gets their credit as due to them as they rightfully deserve. An excellent question, Lisa, an excellent question. Right after the daughters of Tzelofchad, the question was, shouldn't the daughters of Tzelofchad have already been married and been part of other tribes? So actually, after the daughters of Tzelofchad ask Moshe for their portion of land that they feel is they rightly deserve, the rest of the tribe of Menashe comes to Moshe and says, hold it, Moshe. If you give these girls, these ladies, these women, a portion of land of Eretz Yisrael, they're going to get married to somebody in a different tribe, and they're going to take their portion of land to a different tribe. So here we are, we're going to get our portion of the land of Eretz Yisrael, and all of a sudden these portions are going to get hacked off while these women go and marry somebody else from the other tribe. We want to keep our land to us, to ourselves. We love our land. Has to stay in the family. So they got to make a decision. Says Moshe, you're right. So he made a rule, he made a law for just that generation itself, that the daughters of Tzelofchad, if they want to inherit a portion of land as part of their tribe, they are forbidden to marry outside of their tribe. They must marry within the tribe of Menashe in order to keep the inheritance in the family. Should they decide to, quote unquote, marry out, and I don't like using that term because it has a different connotation today, but marry outside of their tribe, they can do so, but then they have to leave their portion. So they got to choose. Marry whoever you want, or marry within the tribe and keep the land there, but the land has to stay within the tribe. So as far as their age is concerned, they're definitely older, but they're clearly still around, I guess. And that's the only way I would say for that. Yeah. So continuing onward, what's going on here? Okay. Verse 4, but tikravna lifnei Elazar Kohen, they approach Elazar, the high priest, velifnei Yehoshua bin Nun, and they come to Yehoshua, velifnei HaNesiim, in front of all the priests, and they say, Adonai tziva et Moshe, God commanded Moshe, don't forget, latet lanu nachala betoch achenu, to give our portion amongst our brothers. And they follow through, vayiten lahem al pi Adonai nachala betoch achei avihim. Yehoshua indeed follows suit and gives them their portion. So these are important because they tie up those loose ends from the Torah. We've seen a number of times Yehoshua, the book of Yehoshua, ties up some of those loose ends which Moshe was unable to do because he didn't enter the land of Israel. Several decades later, he is able to fulfill that. And so we see that the word of the Torah is fulfilled and the commandment of Hashem is followed through. And I think that that's very important. That's part of Yehoshua's mission. Part of Yehoshua's mission as the leader is to tie up those loose ends from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu and to faithfully commit himself to what his teacher Moshe had left for him behind to do. Another important thing to note over here, for those who recall back to our discussion of the tribe of Yehudah, in the tribe of Yehudah, we also had some similarities to this one. We also had what we'll see now, a complaint about land. And we also saw women of courage come up to take hold of this situation of land. In the previous chapter, in chapter 15, we saw that Kalev bin Yefuneh got his portion of land, and he wanted to conquer another spot, which was called Kiryat Sefer, and he couldn't do it. And he said, whoever comes and conquers Kiryat Sefer can have my daughter, can marry my daughter. And who should come along? Otniel ben Kenaz comes and conquers the land. And he gives, Kalev ben Yefuneh gives his daughter Salcha to Otniel ben Kenaz. But she's not happy with the portion of land that they got. The portion of land is desert land, it's arid, it's dry. So what does she do? She says to her husband, go ask for more land. And Otniel ben Kenaz doesn't want to do it. She says, you won't do it? I'll do it. And Salcha goes to her father and says, this is not good enough. We need a better portion of land, one that has irrigation, one that has water. We want a better piece of land. And Kalev ben Yefuneh gives it to her, right? Why do I bring that story up? It's very similar to what we have in the story of the daughters of Tzilofchad. We have this concept of women coming to the forefront when it comes to settling the land, demanding their portion of land in Eretz Yisrael, and they want a good portion of land. Why do I think that's significant? Because it's almost as if the jobs are split in half. Everything we've done until now is the conquest of Eretz Yisrael. Well, the conquest was pretty much done by the men when they fought the battles. But the settlement of the land of Eretz Yisrael, which is perhaps the harder and more important of the two, that was done and pioneered by the women, right? That one was taken on by these women of courage, by Salcha, who took her land, by the daughters of Tzilofchad, who showed their land. The women are the ones who are going to settle and lay the foundation and the groundwork for the land of Eretz Yisrael, and certainly they play their role in that as well, and they play it to perfection. So I think it's important that the text in these parallel stories between Yosef and Yehudah highlights the great role that women played in settling the land of Eretz Yisrael, much like women settle a home and really lay down the bedrock and foundation upon which Torah values can go ahead and be built. Not to mention, I think women have this natural affinity for the land of Israel that maybe for the men doesn't come as natural for them, but for the women, they had it and they express it and show it. And the text of the Navi makes sure that we know it as well. To close out today's class, we want to read the final story in chapter 17, which is an interesting story. I'm going to skip down these verses, continue to talk about the boundaries themselves. You can look at them and see the cities that are important. It just gives us the outline of it. But at the end, we get to a very interesting, somewhat concerning, but, a story at the end here that I think we need to discuss. It's the last 4 or 5 Pesukim of chapter 17. Let's start at verse 14. Verse 14 says, V'daberu b'nei Yosef el Yehoshua lemor. The tribe of Yosef comes to Yehoshua and says, Madua natata li nahala goral echad v'hevel echad v'ani amrav ad asher ad ko berechani Adonai. Why have you given me one portion so small, and I have so many people, and God has blessed me? Now that's very surprising because I just showed you on the map how big the tribe of Menashe's portion was. Not to mention, they got half on the other side of the Jordan River and half on this side. And they come to Moshe and they come to Yehoshua and they say, Yehoshua, you gave us such a small portion. We have so many people that God has blessed us with. How could you do this to us? It's a very interesting request. Very, very interesting complaint, we should say. We'll have to see what we make of this. What does Yehoshua say to them in verse 15? Vayomer alehem Yehoshua. Yehoshua says to them, Im am ravata, yeah? If you guys have so many people, ale lecha hayara, go up to the forest. You guys have a lot of forest in your portion. Cut down the forest. Ubereta lecha sham be'eretz ha'perizi v'harefaim, ki atz lecha harefraim. Go take control of the forest. Go chop the forest down. Go take the mountain and settle those lands. So to settle those areas as well. What's the problem? You guys have a lot of people. You have a lot of manpower. Go do that. Verse 16, they respond to Yehoshua. They say, Vayomeru b'nei Yosef, lo yimatze lanu haha. No, we can't go to the mountain. Why? Verechev barzel b'chol ha'kena'ani hayoshev be'eretz ha'emek. Because there's also the Canaanites are there. They have iron chariots in the land of the valley. La'asher be'bet she'an uvnoteha, which is in the area of Bet She'an, which is part of Menashe's land. Ve'la'asher be'emek Israel. So they seem to say that there's two problems for them. Number one, they can't take the mountain. It's rough terrain. They don't want to go there. It's too much work. But not to mention the fact that the Canaanites seem to be there, or at least on the way, and they want to take their land too, but they're too powerful. The people of Menashe say we can't conquer them. They have iron chariots. There's nothing we could do. So in the land of Menashe, there's Canaanites who are blocking them, and there's a forest and a hill that they can't take control of. And as a result, that is shrinking their land. So while it appears that they have a lot in terms of inhabitable lands for their population, they seem to say to Yehoshua, we don't have what it takes. What are we going to do? Yehoshua tells them, sorry, kiddos, no go. He tells them in verse 17, Vayomer Yehoshua el bet Yosef le'Ephraim ve'limnashe lemon. Yehoshua says to the house of Yosef, to both Menashe and Ephraim. And it's a little bit debated here. We don't have time to go into this, but the commentaries debate who were the ones who complained in the beginning. Was it both tribes, Menashe and Ephraim? Or was it just Menashe, because they mentioned Bet She'an, which is in the tribal territory of Menashe? Or was it just Menashe and then Ephraim somehow kind of got lumped in with it? The commentaries are a little bit split on that point. Let's go with the idea that originally it was just Menashe who complained. Now all of a sudden Yehoshua says, let's not talk just to Menashe, talk to your brothers Ephraim also. He says, why not get them involved too? And says, look, if you guys team up, Am Rav Ata, you are a great people. You have tremendous numbers. Bekoach gadolach, and you have a tremendous amount of strength. Lo yihye lecha goral echad. You should not be limiting yourselves to one lot. Expand your land. Ki hari hiyelach. The mountain shall be for you. Ki ya'arhu, it's just forest. V'haya lecha totzotav. You should be able to take it. Ki torish et ha'kna'ani. Go inherit the Kna'ani. Ki rechev barzelo. Even though they have chariots of iron. Ki chazaku, despite the fact that they are in fact strong. So it ends with Yehoshua telling them, this is on you guys. I've given you the land. We've done all the conquering as a nation that we're going to do. Here's your portion. You guys can team up together, handle the forest, handle the Canaanites, and God will help you. But it's on you. You got to go ahead and do it. So we learn a few things from here. Number one, when Yehoshua gave them the territory to each tribe got a general outline of where their territory was, but what they did within that territory, how they expanded it, how they settled it, how they inhabited it, what they did with the people there, that was their own. They had to figure that out for themselves. And they could technically expand their territory, make it more inhabitable. They could go outside the boundaries slightly if they so pleased to go ahead and do it, if they had the fortitude to do it. Menashe and Ephraim seemed to lack that fortitude. They seemed to lack that initiative to go and take over the forest and to push out the Kna'ani. Their lack of faith, perhaps a little bit in Hashem, is debilitating for them. And Yehoshua gives them that criticism, and that's how the chapter ends. But we know that Menashe and Ephraim did not conquer those lands. They did not take over the forest. They left it as it was, despite their complaints, and it ends up coming to haunt them later on, as it did with the tribe of Yehuda and Ephraim in the book of Shoftim. I think 2 points that I'd like to conclude with is, number one, we see that, actually 1 point, which is a little bit about the tribe of Menashe. The tribe of Menashe although they complain to Yehoshua here, and they don't go to the furthest lengths that they should, it's interesting that they should be the ones to complain. We said they got a gigantic portion in the land. They have portion on both sides. It's pretty surprising. But I think it goes to show you how much Menashe loved the land of Eretz Yisrael. It goes back to the point we started with. Any complaint about the land is a complaint that the people want the land. It's not a complaint against Hashem. It's not a complaint against Yehoshua. It's everybody wanting every single speck of dust that they could possibly get their hands on as far as Eretz Yisrael is concerned. It's a testament to their love of Eretz Yisrael. And we see that the tribe of Menashe has a deep-seated love for the land of Israel. It's why their girls, their women, are pushing so hard to get their rightful portion. It's why the men say, don't marry anybody else, because we want to keep hold of our portion in the land of Israel. It's why the tribe of Menashe, which descends from Yosef himself, despite living so far out, so long, most of his life he lived outside of Israel. Yosef was sold into slavery at age 17. 17, he was sold into slavery. He died at age 110. He only returned between age 17 and 110. He only returned to the land of Israel once to bury his father Yaakov. That was it. And he came straight back down to the land of Mitzrayim. For 93 years, he visited Eretz Yisrael once. After living there 17 years, the young years, you'd expect Yosef to have no connection to the land of Eretz Yisrael. What's Yosef's dying wish? Be buried in Eretz Yisrael. It's amazing. Somebody who lived outside of the land of Israel, and maybe because he lived outside of the land of Israel, had such a love and appreciation for the land of Israel. And it clearly trickles down to his children, to Menashe and Ephraim, who have their portions, who beg for their portions, whose women want more portions, who come to Yehoshua and say, Yehoshua, we need more. We have too many people. We need to spread out. We need to expand. We need more. While it's a complaint and it sounds a little bit like they're nagging and they don't go as far as they should to get it, which is a criticism on their part, the fact that they want it shows you their love for Eretz Yisrael. And I think that that's very important to go ahead and note. So we have a lot of parallels between the story here of Yosef and his children and how they inhabit the land to Yehuda, conquering and expanding. Yehuda was able to expand, right? When Caleb got the city of Hebron, he tells Otniel goes and conquers Kiryat Sefer. They expand a little bit. Yehuda is able to expand. They have their portion. Yosef and Menashe, they struggle a little bit with it, but we see the juxtaposition of the two. We see similarities within their stories. We see women come to the forefront. We see a love of Eretz Yisrael, and I think all of that can give us a lot of inspiration, despite living outside of Eretz Yisrael, for what Eretz Yisrael means for our people and what it's meant for us throughout our history. We concluded today chapters 16 and 17. Be'ezrat Hashem, we will push forward. The next few chapters we'll probably race through a little bit more because it talks about a lot of the other tribes. We'll do a little bit on Binyamin, hopefully make our way to the end of the book where some interesting stories close out Yehoshua's life, and then we're on over to Sefer Shoftim. So we continue the journey next week, Be'ezrat Hashem. Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
More encouragement to say you can do it, just go ahead and do it. It's there for you.
Yeah. I think he tries at the end a little bit, but he's saying it's not as much as you would expect. In 17 and 18, he does say to them, you're a great amravata, you're a great people. Koach gadolach, you have a lot of strength. Go take it. It's yours for the taking. So I look at that as encouragement. Maybe it's not the typical language of encouragement, but I think that that's definitely encouragement on the part of Yehoshua. He's trying to get them to do it. And he's, by the way, speaking to his own people, because Yehoshua is from Ephraim. He's from the tribe. He's trying to pump up his own people, but you know, they fall a little bit short here on this situation. Yeah. See, someone in the chat had a quick question. Let's see if that's a question or not. I don't know. No, just a thank you. Okay, you're welcome. Everybody's welcome. Any other things? Okay, wonderful. Same time next week, Be'ezrat Hashem. Take care. I also do the recordings, so